like the music introduction. That was good. Thank you, Nikesh. I would like to say hello to Javier Rodríguez Zapatero, our director of Google in Spain, and Barbara Navarro, in charge of public affairs and government issues in Spain and Portugal, I understand. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure and a privilege to take part in this new edition of Zeitgeist Europe. This space offers an exciting time to reflect on key issues in current events that really embody the zeitgeist or spirit of our times. A space that may very well make us understand a bit better, as we saw just now, the severe economic crisis and understand about the flaws that led us into it, while it can also provide us with some clues about how indeed a new economic order, if so, may take shape, but hopefully deeply inspired in values such as integrity and accountability. I would like to thank Google for this kind invitation, and I would like to talk to you a little bit about a part of the world that is closely linked to Spain for many reasons, very dear to our hearts, what we call Iberoamérica. I intend to present you a few ideas to explain why we consider this region and its peoples of great interest to us, and why we believe today the world, particularly Europe and North America, the West, should pay more attention to it, to its great potential, to the good opportunity to effectively expand global progress by reinforcing together this great Atlantic area of democracy, stability, and development that we form all together. If you actually take from the North American point of Alaska or Canada down to Patagonia and Europe, in that triangle you can concentrate about 62% of global GDP. That has to mean something. Many of you might ask yourselves why I talk about Iberoamerica and not Latin America. They're two different but not opposing concepts. Iberoamerica is that part of the Americas where Iberian languages are spoken, in an official way, of course. In a wider sense, what we call the Ibero-American community of nations has for nearly 20 years brought together 22 sovereign, independent, and equal states of the Americas and the Iberian Peninsula that speak Spanish and Portuguese. I know to talk about states in this scenario after what we've heard may sound a bit of a relic, but I think it's still very valid. Now, this Ibero-American dimension is an essential part of our past, our present, and about how the way we envision our future. We are in many ways inseparable. We cannot fully understand ourselves as Ibero-American, as our Ibero-American soul is so strong. And the same applies for countries in that region that feel that way towards Spain and Portugal. Our cultural identity is deeply, deeply and intimately intertwined. Therefore, it has great influence in our foreign policy, our cultural creativity, our business overseas, and our efforts in foreign aid. But it also explains much of the movement we have seen in the past years and today in, for example, migration, tourism, and education efforts. Of course, why am I talking to you about this? The Spanish Crown naturally devotes special care to this region and the new realities it represents, not only due to our sentiments, but actually it is a constitutional mandate. So in my job, I've had the honor and the privilege of being closely involved with a lot of time in my agenda dedicated to this region. This has allowed me to enhance my knowledge and affection for that region, and for the past 10 years I've been representing my country in many events in those countries, for example, inaugural ceremonies of new presidents. This experience has provided me the invaluable opportunity to meet the leadership, to understand more about their cultural and political developments and to understand, and this is to my point, more about what they are capable and what they can represent in the future. And as Crown Prince, I'm really determined to preserve our role as a monarchy and its relevance to Spanish foreign affairs. Of course, to represent our legitimate interests all over the world, especially in this area I'm talking to you about. And when in a time that national and international politics, that boundary is fading rapidly with the impact of globalization. But the second reason I'm talking to you about this is that, as I said earlier, I'm convinced that this region should have a growing presence in the international scene. It has a great potential to contribute to global governance, and it bears new economic and geopolitical reality. Why? Well, let me give you a quick overview of what Iberoamérica, as I explained, represents today. It's a huge community, both in terms of geography and population, but above all, in terms of its cohesion. And you might be surprised about this, but think about it, 2 major languages and cultures with unquestionable powers of integration and interaction. Surely that is a great economic opportunity. At the same time, this community of independent nations are ruled largely by the same principles and values of freedom, human rights, and democracy, something, of course, also shared with our European countries and the rest of the Americas. The region on the whole has just ended an economic cycle for the first time in history where every country at once has seen an expansion. It's very uncommon in the past, of course. But Iberoamérica is not a product of intellectual construction or a historical relic, but rather a living reality. It arises mutual affection, solidarity. It's actually also reinforced by the flows of migrations of the 20th century, still today. And all that has anchored a collective consciousness above our diverse countries and differences, and very far from that spirit of colonial rule or the tensions during independence. This region probably hosts the largest, fastest growing melting pot in the past few centuries, with demographic groups hailing from continents, cultures, and religions into what we call el mestizaje, it's melting pot. The region is a leading cultural power with immensely rich artistic and historical heritage, and has a very strong creative genius, producing results that are worldwide recognized. But what we call the Ibero-American Community of Nations is an important space for concerted policies, and especially for true multilateral cooperation among its members. It was created about 20 years ago, and today it has a generally coordinated institutional framework. Our heads of state get together every year in a summit, which has grown in its reach and ambition, and also in effective results in many areas. But let me stress that especially by strengthening democracy and bringing closer this part of the world, 2 continents, Europe and America, to improve millions of people's lives. I want to focus a little bit on 2 of these areas, what I mentioned about language, what that represents, and a bit about the economy. In terms of language, together this community represents, it has 2 major languages, as I mentioned, and that provides with a powerful instrument of communication, unity, cultural industries, and international projection. Spanish is today the 2nd language of international communication, only after English. And according to different statistics, it's spoken by about 450 million people. I think the 3rd language would be Hindi. Where are you, Nikesh? Can't see you. Furthermore, Spanish or Castilian is the official language in 20 countries and many international organizations. And even in the United States, you have about 50 million people of Hispanic origin who speak the language, and it's a very rapidly growing community. And it has become already the second country with most native-speaking, Spanish-speaking in the world after Mexico and ahead of Spain and Colombia. When we talk about who's studying Spanish in the world, it's the second language that is actually studied actively. And we have an institution called the Cervantes Institute that works around the world to offer technical support for the study of Spanish, but it also helps promote the culture, not only Spanish, of course, but that culture that is produced and represents all Spanish-speaking countries. So it's a Spanish institution serving Iberoamerican culture as a whole. And as I mentioned, it's spoken in many countries, but it does give a sense of unity within that diversity. Few languages, few global languages actually have an association that works together with 22 countries as equals to preserve a unity, to look forward in what language means in this new world. The importance of language is not only by the amount of speakers that we have in the world, but also what the cultural richnesses that they can bring, that they can bear. I'll give you just a figure about Spain. In Spain, culture, language dedicated represents about 15% of our GDP. And of course, there's vibrant industries dedicated to culture, but think about what that would mean in the whole of the Iberoamerican region. And on the internet, especially relevant to this forum, Spanish ranks third after English and German in the number, the total volume of pages online. But it's third as well in the number of users, and this would be after English and Chinese. And then, of course, I don't want to escape mentioning that the other language in the American community is Portuguese, the second most widely spoken in the region, and spoken in many other countries in the world as well, about 250 million native speakers. But now I'll mention a bit about the economy. The Iberoamerican community's GDP adds to about $3 trillion US dollars, a figure equals to 10% of the world's GDP. It's home to about 10% of the world's population, about 600 million in this region, and its landmass equals 15% of the entire surface of the Earth. It holds the greatest biodiversity, 1/3 of the world's water reserves, and treasures many other natural resources that are in growing demand worldwide, especially by countries in Asia, in APEC, for example, where half of the world's manufacturing and trade is concentrated. That is an interesting connection, by the way, that deserves a whole session, but I won't burden you with it just now. What about poverty reduction? It's one of the major challenges facing this region as well. But important advances have been made. Just imagine about 50 million people have been lifted out of poverty in recent years. And social spending has reached a historic high in percentage of GDP. But, of course, a lot remains to be done. It's one of the biggest challenges, especially in income distribution and equality. Mexico, Central America, South America are enjoying great sustained growth. From an average 2.9% GDP between 1995 and 2004, they have gone to a 4.8% between 2005 and 2008. While their inflation has actually been coming down, an area that was known to have such high figures in inflation, it's come down from 11.1 to 6.5% average. But another positive statistic shows that 8 countries of that region that represent roughly about 60% of Iberoamerican population have passed the 10,000 barrier of GDP per capita income in PPP, power purchasing parity, which means that middle classes are actually coming up, favoring the region's true potential as an attractive and robust market. And by the way, in terms of ICTs, it will certainly surprise many of you to know that this region has been the main recipient of telecom investment between 1990 and 2005. Today it holds about 145 million internet users, but rapidly growing. So Ibero-American economies have gone from strength to strength. It's no longer an isolated region, and it's increasingly affirming its weight and its role on the international scene. It's undergone a major transformation. And I have to say that in the onset of this global economic and financial crisis, it's confronting it with a much calmer view than in the past. Previously, we know that Latin America was credited for many of the crises. Today, it's not. It's not suffering it in such an intense way. But of course, this crisis is global, and no one will remain unscathed. The latest estimates in the IMF show that economies in the region will touch bottom during the first half of this year, with an overall 1.5% contraction in 2009, and will come up in 2010 to 1.6. But this doesn't seem very representative, but it's interesting to compare with what will happen in the more affluent economies and more advanced economies, because the performance is much poorer. 3.8 slump in 2009 and 0 growth for 2010. So there's hope in this region. Now, what about our relations, particularly bilateral, with those countries? This relations has intensified immensely in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and of course, unprecedented since their independence 200 years ago. We have contributed to shaping and creating this Ibero-American community of nations, and also often played locally a role as an impartial broker in different controversies and disputes. We have multiplied our efforts to draw Europe and Latin America closer together, and we have raised our profile in those countries in areas like business, development, education, and culture. Of course, I have to admit quite candidly that this aspect of our foreign policy, in this new age, has increased our clout in that region, and it's given us a bigger international profile. But it is for the common benefit, because we strongly believe it is worth it to support development and help consolidate democratic regimes in every one of our sister nations in the Americas, as it is to help efforts for a higher degree of regional and sub-regional integration on the other side of the Atlantic in order to face challenges together with a wider scope, sharing the strengths and the burdens, while making the region's voice more clearly heard worldwide. On the institutional front, we have, of course, many bilateral relations, but this runs parallel to achieving a closer contact between our societies. I think that is more important in today's world as well. And let me mention, because how do people perceive this? I mean, what is their opinion about it? Well, a survey called Latinobarometro, conducted across the region last year, showed that 62% of people showed a highly positive image of our country, so what that means in our relations with them. And 67 considered to be good and felt that Spain's impact in the country, in the country's history, was actually positive. This gives us a great margin to work together with them. What does the economy mean in our bilateral relations? Well, of course, our own modernization in the last years and dynamic economy has helped to do that, and we've more than tripled our investment in the last 20 years. So by the end of 2007, actually worldwide, we became the 5th largest investor, which meant that in the region, we were the 2nd largest investor, just after the United States, with 1.3 billion euros in accumulated investments. That is roughly 10% of Spain's own GDP. And that was mainly concentrated in 4 countries: Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. But we have about 743 companies established in Iberoamérica, and out of the IBEX 35 stock exchange, 31 companies are present in all sectors: finance, energy, communications, utilities, services in general. These companies have, of course, been there for more than a decade since they set sight on that market, and they've been helping in modernizing and promoting growth. But it's particularly interesting to draw your attention on the publishing industry. This industry in the region is actually the 2nd ranking in the world, only after Europe, in the volume of books that are published. And it's greatly due to the cultural and dynamism and its language. But it's also because many of our companies in culture and publishing are committed to the Ibero-American market and promoting that culture. I won't go deeply into trade because it's important, but it's not as relevant. And I would say that within the region, it is very important to promote further trade to really take advantage of the synergies that this can create, because trade within the region is very weak, to say the least. We also dedicate a lot on our development assistance. Only last year, more than 40% of the funds that our government earmarks as ODA, about 1.5 billion euros, were actually allocated to projects in this region. Institution building, fight against poverty, essential social needs, emergency assistance, you name it. Of course, microcredit is there as well. But what happened on this side of the Atlantic? Spain actually joined the European Union in '86. And since then, we've tried to uphold our Ibero-American dimension within the European Union by, as I said before, trying to bring closer these 2 regions. Of course, there's a historic reason, but I think it was also an obligation and an opportunity. So today, I feel strongly about this, and I think this objective seems all the more sound and obvious, looking at the way the world is going. To a large extent, the key values and principles that we share with our Ibero-American family are those that we share within Europe. And we try to translate our sense of solidarity and hope towards the Americas into proper policies and programs with the help of our European partners and institutions. Therefore, Spain and Portugal have been fostering trade, cooperation between the European Union and the sub-regional groups of America, Mercosur, the Andean Community, Central America, the Caribbean, to reach specific agreements. But the wider objective would be a strategic partnership between the European Union, Latin America, and the Caribbean. This is not yet finalized. It is in the blueprints. But we hope that in 2010, during our presidency of the European Union, we will host the 6th summit of cooperation between Europe and Latin America. And certainly we will push further towards reaching this great strategic partnership. Let me tell you a little bit about Iberoamerica and the United States. I won't go in depth, but let me mention, of course, there's the continental connection, an immense space. but many issues and relations and of all kinds, political, socioeconomic, security. But they also share linguistic and cultural ties. Of course, there's a strong Hispanic presence in the United States because of our common Spanish heritage, but also because of the modern flows of migration, northbound migratory flow. And history shows us that very often the relations of the United States with that region have not been easy, to say the least. Remember the concept of the backyard of US foreign policy. But Spain, both as an Iberoamerican country and as a partner, ally, and friend of the United States, supports more intense and fruitful cooperation and understanding between Iberoamerica and the United States. And we hope to see this in the upswing with the new administration. Certainly the tone and the first steps seem to go in the right direction. But let me sum up. Iberoamerica is increasingly present in the world and eager to say where it goes and how it spins. Spain supports and promotes this new reality, fully conscious of the capability the region has to contribute to a more stable and just international community, in which effective multilateralism and human rights serve both as guidelines and goals. Isn't this just too good for us all? I believe so. I trust that the facts and figures I offered you present a somewhat different approach of the world we live today, and especially toward Iberoamerica. Of course, it's the Spanish perspective. But I hope I stressed enough the new sense of purpose that exists within this community. It's a great space that is diverse, united in many ways, mestizo, as I mentioned, but with enormous potential and open to the world. One that has contributed, is contributing even more, and has yet to contribute so much more to the zeitgeist or spirit of our times. Thank you very much.